Hey folks, Jeff Salzman here, and welcome to another episode of Post-Progressive Inquiries, where Steve McIntosh and I explore the next stage of American politics. The Post-Progressive Project is produced by the Institute for Cultural Evolution. Steve McIntosh is founder and director of the Institute, and I am on the board. And today, I'm going to help Steve introduce a major new initiative of the Institute, a brand new web publication called the Post-Progressive Post. Welcome, Steve McIntosh.
Thank you, Jeff. It's a pleasure to be with you as always, and I'm excited to share with you the progress that we're making and the new website we've created.
It seems like there's just been a new phase of growth and output since the publication of your last book, Developmental Politics. Subhead, How America Can Grow into a Better Version of Itself, which came out a little over a year ago, I guess.
Yes.
And so fill us in on the progress since then.
So since the publication of that book, we've attracted a lot of new interest and support for the Institute for Cultural Evolution think tank, namely some new directors who've boosted our funding. And that's allowed us to hire a seasoned executive director, Josh Leonard. And he and I have been working on developing the primary project, the primary activity of the Institute for Cultural Evolution, at least for 2021 and 2022, which is, as you mentioned, the Post-Progressive Project. So by the term post-progressive, we are working to stake out a kind of higher political ground, something that includes all of the important gains and perspectives and layers of moral concern that progressivism brings, but to transcend progressivism in a way that can better include the establishment, the previous culture of America, namely modernity and even traditionalism as well. So post-progressivism aims to be omni-inclusive, as we call it, and it does what progressivism has a hard time doing, and that is moving beyond the rejection of the best of what's come before.
Yep. So, Steve, just fill in the philosophy and the thinking and principles behind post-progressivism in general.
Sure. It starts with a perspective on culture, which we call cultural intelligence. And that's a kind of a leadership skill that people can use regardless of where they are on the political spectrum or what their political views are. Cultural intelligence is the ability to step outside of your own perspective, your own worldview, and recognize that America has three major worldviews, which are divided into approximately four major political positions. Each of these political positions stands for very important values, and each one carries baggage or pathologies. So cultural intelligence is the practice of carrying forward the best while pruning away the worst of each of these political positions in a kind of a new level of integration, a new synthesis, where progressivism adds a very important layer of inclusion, including those who've been marginalized and victimized. We're trying to go the next step by including the rest of the society, right? We strive to be omni-inclusive, as we say. And so the Post-Progressive Project has basically three main goals for 2021 and 2022. First is put this way of thinking on the map, and that is more formally grow and deepen the public profile and reputation of the post-progressive political perspective. The second goal is build a movement, and that is develop and promote an influential political constituency among people who identify as post-progressive. And the third is generally improve American democracy to try to overcome hyperpolarization, which is really the main problem that we're focusing on. And arguably, hyperpolarization is the mother of all our problems, because if we could reach consensus, bipartisan consensus, or some higher level consensus on a whole variety of issues, we'd be able to use politics to make our country much better, and we'd have a much more functional political process, which our democracy was designed to function as. So a way of describing that, improving American democracy, is to foster political and cultural evolution on every front of its development. Right? So evolution is not just occurring beyond progressivism. All of these major cultural factions in America can and are evolving, And fostering, cultivating, encouraging that growth across the political spectrum is part of what the Post-Progressive Project is about.
Right. Yeah.
You and I have talked about the basic philosophy of post-progressivism on previous podcasts. And the main focus of today's conversation is to show off the first sort of artifact of the Post-Progressive Project that we've been working on. The executive director of the Institute for Cultural Evolution, Josh Leonard, I'm president. The two of us have worked together over the last 5 months on pulling together a website that would be a kind of proof of concept, right? Part political newspaper, part brochure for this post-progressive perspective. And we are proud of it. We're launching it now and love to show it off to you.
Yeah. Can't wait to see it.
Great. Okay, so I'm going to share my screen. Okay, can you see that?
Yeah.
Okay, so this is the homepage of the Post-Progressive Post. And like a newspaper, many of these rectangular spaces will be changing as new content flows in. Some of the content is evergreen, but lots of it is will be updating on a weekly basis to make the site a destination for people who are interested and excited by this emerging perspective. And so let me just take you through the website.
Yeah, walk us through.
Okay, so because this philosophy...
And just truth in advertising here, I have seen it at many stages and love it. So I'm just happy to help you show it to the people.
Great, thanks. Well, and you've been instrumental in helping us develop the thinking behind it, the financing of it, and generally you've been a tremendous supporter on our board of directors to help us bring this to fruition.
Yeah, my privilege.
Okay, so because this is a political philosophy, our first focus is on spreading the word, right? Making this political philosophy visible to the larger public. It's not just an intellectual niched out community. We're trying to take advantage of the fact that the culture war in America is worse than ever. People are despairing. The growing cultural power of progressivism, like all of these major worldviews, modernity, traditionalism, each one of them have very important upsides and also baggage, debilitating downsides. And as progressivism comes of age and really takes up a lot of space in the culture, inevitably its downsides become more evident and the need to keep moving. None of these worldviews are the end of history and certainly is not progressivism. So we're trying to spread the word, as I mentioned in our main goals. And so simplifying the message is very important. We provide a variety of different ways that people who are new to this perspective can get a sense of what it's about. So this is our basic approach, which occupies the prime rectangle here on our newspaper homepage. And so just clicking on this, we have a whole variety of different ways of expressing our basic approach. We've got a 100-word version, which I'll read in a second. We've got a 700-word version with graphics, which I'll just show you. We've got a completely visual, graphical version. We have clips from the course that I held on Zoom earlier in this year. And we have an interesting section on countering potential objections, right? From left and right. What are people going to object to and how can we respond to those sort of arguments, promoting the perspective and explaining why we believe it's the way forward. So just quickly going over this 100-word basic approach with the graphics. 1, we want to help mend the torn social fabric of American culture. 2, our position is neither left nor right nor centrist. We're exploring higher ground.
Love it.
3, our perspective is post-progressive, which transcends progressivism's downsides while carrying forward its important upsides. 3, we advocate cultural intelligence, which integrates values from across the political spectrum.
Yep.
5, our strategy is to foster cultural evolution by showing how America can grow into a better version of itself, as the subtitle of my book proclaims. 6, our theory of change is that culture and consciousness co-evolve when people expand the scope of what they can value. And 7, we're building a new home for the political homeless, which is, we'll explain that as I go through the website. But just to go back to number 6 for a second, our theory of change, we're not really trying to change people's values. We're trying to expand their values so that they can value perspectives of those that they disagree with and recognize how the positive features of our entire cultural spectrum are actually interdependent. Even though they're polarized, there's both a stuck version of these polarities, which we're experiencing now, and a healthy version of these indestructible polarities between these worldviews, and such that we're working to establish a relationship of challenge and support, wherein both sides of these natural polarities can create value in their own way and work together.
Fabulous.
So that's the 100-word version.
Yeah.
We also have a 700-word version, which is worth reviewing. This also has graphics. I'm not going to read it, but it shows how America is stretched out, how cultural intelligence is a new leadership skill, which everyone can adopt to help depolarize their own thinking, how our politics is a politics of culture, in the sense that we are focused on the cultural conflicts that are upstream from Washington, D.C. or normal political parties or interests. We're focusing on culture, and we recognize that worldviews, intersubjective structures of agreement that transcend generations and that persist across history, that these major worldviews in America are really the basic units of cultural analysis and understanding. And so we show, as we mentioned, these 3 major worldviews arranged demographically in the order of their emergence in history. Modernists or modernity is about 50% of the population of the U.S. Traditionalists are about 30%, and progressives are, around 20%, maybe growing greater, monthly. Our perspective, we attempt to take an outside and above perspective that allows us to see all these worldviews. And then this 700-word version summarizes the dignities and the disasters, right? The positives and the negatives of each one of these cultural structures. It goes through modernist values and modernism's negatives, traditionalism's important values and its negatives, progressivism's important values and its negatives. And then we show this graphic here towards the end where we take the 3 worldview circles and we show the emergence of this post-progressive worldview beyond progressivism, showing it as a red-blue yin-yang, just to indicate the attempt to integrate healthy versions of the right and the left, and at the same time, showing through those arrows an attempt to include the best of what's come before, including progressivism, and how all of these values, the positive aspects of progressive, modernist, and traditional values, can be synthesized. That's what cultural evolution does, and that's what the post-progressive project is all about.
Can I just read this one paragraph, Steve? It's fabulous.
Sure.
The aha moment of cultural intelligence comes when we see how all these values are needed, not only by our larger society, but by each of us personally. And as we come to appreciate and affirm the entire spectrum of positive values, we literally raise our own consciousness. Well said.
Thanks. Okay, so let's look at the next on-ramp, the next sort of basic overview position, and that is what we're calling polarities on the left and right. And this is the sort of the visual or graphic illustration taken from many of the slides from my course, and it acts as a review of some of the things we just covered, as well as providing some new analysis. So again, here are the 3 major American worldviews, and then here we show how when we arrange, the worldviews at the top are arranged in a timeline of their emergence. But when we take the 3 worldviews and we arrange them across the familiar left-right spectrum in American politics, we can see how progressives are mostly on the left. There's a few libertarian progressives, for example, but by and large, progressive culture is uniformly left, right? Similarly, traditionalism, while again, there are some traditionalists who vote for Democrats, by and large, most traditionalists at this point in history are loyal to the right, at least some version of it. Whereas modernity was shown in the previous graphic as just being a big orange or red circle. Here I show modernity divided into 2. And that's because modernity, unlike traditionalism, which is mostly right, and progressivism, which is mostly left, modernity is rather split down the middle, or at least 60-40, between right versions and left versions. And as I explain in detail in developmental politics, this is partially because the worldviews of traditionalism and progressivism represent competing moral systems, which are in a sense pulling. We're in a tug of war for the allegiance of the modernist majority right now, which means that many liberal modernists are drawn to a more progressive morality. Many conservative modernists still feel loyalty to a more traditional morality, even they may pick and choose elements of it. But what's important to see in this graphic is that the polarities exist, but there's not only one polarity between progressive and Democrat. There's actually between Republicans and Democrats. I should say there's also a polarity on the left and a polarity on the right. And it's this polarity on the left between liberal modernists and progressive postmodernists that's really flaring up right now as progressivism gains more power, at least culturally, and struggles to gain political power. But of course, many of the important liberty values of modernists feel threatened. Free speech is threatened by progressive zealousness, for example. And so this is why we're seeing this tug of war right now between progressives and liberals on the left. And so the polarities are across the spectrum and within the spectrum.
Fascinating, isn't it? The way it arises.
Yeah. Well, it's when we understand the patterns of evolution and how this larger dialectical pattern of emergence influences the structures of history and the sequences of evolution, we can begin to see how we're looking at something that's natural, right? It's intersubjective. It's created by human agreements or disagreements, but it's also something that has a larger systemic reality and behaviors and structures. And so post-progressive political philosophy, as a subset of integral philosophy, is able to see these structures more clearly than ever before, right? It's an integrative meta perspective, which is new in human history, I would argue.
Right on.
So just continuing with this graphic overview, here I show this illustration of geological strata. And most folks, when they think about politics, think about these top layers of the strata, right? Elected officials at the top, political parties as the next level down, and then issues and interests being seen as where the battleground is, in contemporary American politics. But our focus is on the bottom layer, which we're calling bedrock values. And there, that's really where the cultural conflict lies, again, as I argue in detail in developmental politics. So here are those same four categories of American culture, these four factions. And here, looking at their values, I've got nicknames that describe each one. And so we have progressives. We describe their set of values as caring values, right? They care about social justice. They care about the environment at a deeper level. And this brings on a new layer of morality that we're going to need in order to transcend to a higher level of civilization. So caring values are very important. Under the liberal left of center, liberal moderate Democrat types, we've got the fairness values, right? It's more about fairness than caring, but it still has many of the same concerns, and there's lots of overlap between liberalism and progressivism. Then we have the more fiscally conservative modernists and libertarians. Libertarians is a small group, but they're influential. And so this, what we might call center-right, we're calling that liberty values, and I'll elaborate what those mean in a moment. And then, of course, for the socially conservative traditionalists, we're calling those heritage values on the right. And very interesting, just a couple of weeks ago, The Atlantic magazine published an article by journalist George Packer, who has a new book out with some of the same content. And in the Atlantic article, he talks about how America fractured into four parts, which very interestingly confirms this analysis, which we've been talking about for years now. And Packer comes up with his own nicknames, which correspond rather nicely to these value nicknames. So for caring values, he calls it Just America, or he also parenthesizes it as Unjust America. But this is the call for justice, social, economic, and environmental. Then he calls the fairness values category, the liberal modernists, he refers to them as smart America. And those are the achievers and the meritocrats and those who have or in elite positions in the establishment. I would say that what he identifies as smart America is a subset of this larger center-right category, but his analysis is interesting, so I'm including
Center-left.
Center-left, yeah. Sorry, then we have center-right. He calls that free America, right, which corresponds perfectly with liberty values. And then what he calls real America, right, those who think that they represent America's heritage, America's past, America's soul, and so there's some interesting parallels there.
Well, you would have thought that George Packer read developmental politics.
I doubt that he has, but
I don't necessarily, but go on.
Okay. So the key thing to see here as we move to these final graphics are these polarities, right, which I show the polarity across the spectrum, and then this graphic carries forward the polarities within the spectrum. And if we chart these polarities, the polarity on the left and the polarity on the right, we get these two polarity charts, which basically show that each one of these major political factions has both positive values and goals and negative pathologies. It's sort of inevitable that as evolution unfolds and culture develops, that new problems come online that are some ways more challenging than the problems of the previous level, but those are somewhat inevitable. Even as we're solving new problems, we're generating new ones. And so these charts begin to show this with the idea that within at least a manageable polarity, like here the one on the left, shown with the green column and the blue column, the upsides of one within a polarity are able to serve as a remedy for the downsides of the other. So if you make kind of downward diagonal comparisons between the positive values of each, you can see how they can exert a moderating influence on the shortcomings and pathologies of its polar counterpart. This is a natural behavior of value as it develops. Again, I go into this in detail in developmental politics, but understanding the dynamics of polarities and how they do generate value when they're brought into the right alignment. As I mentioned, this relationship of challenge and support. And so even right now, I would say there's hardly any common ground left between left and right, which is why we're not trying to meet in the middle. We're not centrists. We're seeking higher ground. And what that higher ground looks like is an ability to recognize how that the progressivism and center-left liberal modernism form a polarity which is closer to being in a relationship of challenge and support. Sometimes there is healthy challenge and support between these poles on the left, and sometimes there's not, right? So managing this is part of the practice of cultural intelligence, which I mentioned at the beginning, and the idea being that first we need to evolve the left and evolve the right on their own terms. We need to work the polarity. When the challenge and support relationship, it serves to kind of true up both sides, such that if challenge and support can take place on the left can evolve. And if similarly, challenge and support can take place on the right can evolve. And after both have evolved on their own terms and within their own value purview, we'll be in a better position to be able to work the polarity across the left and right. Right? We need a better version, not just of America, but a better version of the left and a better version of the right. And that better version, crucially, carries forward, honors, and reveres all of the major important values that these factions represent. Right? Each one of these cultural categories is, in a sense, a channel for the upward current of the good. Right? They each have their own values, which, as I argue, are foundational to our cultural ecosystem. And so carrying forward those values while trying to ameliorate the problems, this is really the heart of our philosophy and the heart of the Post-Progressive Project.
Steve, why don't you give us just one or two from each of the values so people who are listening can just get a grip on some of what we're talking about?
Sure. So under progressivism, the top value is social justice, diversity, equity, and inclusion, right? Environmental protection, feminism, LGBTQ equality, economic equality, atoning for America's past abuses. These are all elements of the positive values of progressivism. Right over on the left, we have economic and scientific progress, personal success and meritocracy, gender and racial equality, etc. People can look at the charts.
Yep.
Over
And those
liberty
second
values. Go on. What?
that second set that you just talked about was from the center left, not the progressive left. Yeah.
Right. So then we have the center right and the traditionalist right, the socially conservative right, including within this liberty values category in red are individual freedom and private property, limited government and personal privacy, free markets, and unregulated economic growth, or at least lightly regulated. Socially conservative traditionalists are their number one value, at least according to this chart, is patriotism and putting America first, America's national interests, America's people, family values and America's Judeo-Christian heritage, ethnic assimilation and the American dream, hard work and economic just desserts. There are many traditional values, and again, they can't all fit in this chart. As I'll show you, we invite people to help elaborate our descriptions of these different categories. But let me continue with the walkthrough before we get too into the weeds with the philosophy. In addition to the 100 words, the 700 words, the graphic version, we also have this section we're calling countering objectives, countering objections. And here I have arguments. These are 9 potential objections, right? How can you claim to be more evolved? Isn't this just centrism? How can we work with the other side when they won't acknowledge what's true? Don't we have to take care of campaign finance reform before we can make any other political progress? Where's the empirical evidence for these, claims about the evolution of culture? Shouldn't we work on developing progressivism further before we try to transcend progressivism with post-progressivism? An attack from the right might include that because we're not condemning progressivism sufficiently, then we're its useful idiots and we're promoting cultural Marxism, which we certainly don't believe we are. Or an attack from progressivism might say that because we're validating the progress of Western civilization, at least in some lines of development, that we're essentially racist and complicit with white supremacy. We obviously reject that charge, and I have an argument accordingly. And then the final counter is about elitism, right? As you've said, that this is a worldview to which all are welcome. And we're really trying to include, we're trying to be omni-inclusive. And so that is, again, people have to read the arguments to get the details of that. We also have, under our approach, clips, which serve a similar function. These are clips from my course. There's about an hour's worth of short clips that are either answers to specific questions from the course participants or excerpts from specific slideshow lectures that I gave during the course. And that's another way that people who are interested, more want to learn through video can appreciate the website.
Yes.
Then I would be remiss if I didn't praise the various blogs and articles that are part of what we're about. So we have our blog. That'll be the standard sort of update of what we're doing. I'm undertaking a column, which I'm calling Critique of the Week. I hope to get to it weekly, or maybe every 2 weeks or whatever. But I will here. The idea is that I offer constructive critiques of public figures I admire by pointing out how they could benefit from a developmental perspective. So my first critique of the week is about a recent column by Ross Douthat of the New York Times. Next week, I will work on a critique of George Packer, right, and a constructive critique that appreciates his 4 Americas and offers some pointers about how a developmental understanding of those 4 sectors could really help which
he has no understanding of.
Well, he talks about the solution as equal America, but again, there's no verticality of development or understanding of the evolutionary process. So again, it's ripe for a friendly critique, right? So I hope to do that on a regular basis. And then we also have Greg Thomas, who is a highly productive senior fellow of the Institute for Cultural Evolution. We're reprinting his article here, which just appeared in Aereo magazine, Why I'm a Radical Moderate. I recommend that. Carter Phipps, who co-founded the Institute for Cultural Evolution with me, and who's a co-author of my recent book, Conscious Leadership, which Carter and I co-authored with John Mackey. And he's got a very thoughtful piece here on Who Wants to Skip the Civil War, and people can read that. We have Josh Leonard, who I mentioned is our new executive director. His article is on progressive inclusivity is not inclusive enough toward an omni-inclusive post-progressive vision, as we spoke of. We also have a new writer. We have Jessica Nicole, whose article Liberation as Process talks about Martin Luther King Jr.'s liberatory activism and how that relates to omni-inclusivity. So we've got some interesting new voices, and we're going to continue there. We also are highlighting a variety of videos and podcasts, of course, Post-Progressive Inquiries, of which this is an episode, part of the Daily Evolver. Then we have my course clips, and we're also offering my course in full for a modest price that people can take the course on video, all 16 hours of it. The Daily Evolver itself, the parent of Post-Progressive Inquiries, at least for now, very important. Excellent podcast of yours, Jeff, and you and I have had many episodes on the Daily Evolver and hope to have many more. And we definitely want to highlight that and keep updating, show the latest episode here on the website. And then Carter Phipps, in the fall, he launched his own podcast, Thinking Ahead, which is also excellent. He has many different luminaries from all over the spectrum of politics and culture. So I recommend Carter's. And then we have additional videos. Some of them are interesting guerrilla videos made by some of the folks who admire our work. So check those out. Now, I want to focus here on a very important part of the site, which is our platform, our evolving platform of issue positions. So here, our thinking is that even though we may not be experts on any single political issue, we have to show how this perspective, even though it's focused on a politics of culture, reaches all the way down to the ground in terms of specific political issues. And so our approach is to take an issue, identify the problems that need to be solved with respect to that issue, and then talk about what a political policy that worked to bring a win to each one of the worldviews, right? So our philosophy is win-win-win, or stakeholder integration is a more formal term for it, borrowing from business and conscious capitalism. And that is that progressives, modernists, and traditionalists are each important stakeholders in our democracy. And when you come from a post-progressive perspective, you can see how a given piece of legislation can look to give progressives a win, look to give mainstream modernity a win, and even look to the interests of traditionalists. So it's not as if we're asking these folks to bargain this out among themselves. We're trying to embody the best values of all of these positions within our own perspective. So we're arguing for their values, in our own discourse. And so, for example, the first issue that we're publishing here is healthcare reform in the U.S. And this is like a simple 4-page white paper. It's kind of wonky, so I'm not going to get into the details of our policy prescription with regard to healthcare reform. But this section of the page will show the wins. So in healthcare, we see wins for progressivism by providing universal coverage and decrease the costs for people who are poor and marginalized, make healthcare more universal. For modernity, we want to continue to use market mechanisms to help control costs and keep the system from becoming too bureaucratized, right? So that we're modeling our healthcare policy recommendation on healthcare in Switzerland, which is universal, but which also brings in important market mechanisms. And then the wins for traditionalism are we want to, part of our system includes incentives for personal responsibility and self-care, and also brings healthcare to many underserved areas, especially in rural America. So that's just, give you an example of how we're trying to create wins across the board. The platform, these aren't in necessarily order of priority, these issue positions, but they're in the order of the timeline of their being written, right? So we have our healthcare position published on the website now. We'll soon publish our immigration position. We have a near complete energy and climate change win-win-win political position. Education also complete. The one that I'm working on, very important and very delicate, of course, is the issue of racial equality, which we think is very important. And we're in affinity for much of the movement for racial equality that we've seen over the last year and more in the United States. Yep. And we want to just help that succeed in a way that doesn't necessarily need to tear down the best of what's come before. And so then you can see homelessness, business evolution, and the future of work, big tech monopolies. People can look, income inequality. We've got this long list. Yeah. And there are comments.
Abortion, gun control, drugs, religious freedom, campaign finance. I love it.
Yeah.
I mean, you're laying out the agenda, even if it's not filled in yet.
Well, and the idea is that we're not making statements that are final. The way we hope to evolve this platform is to put out maybe what's best called conversation starters, right? Like these 4-page issue positions that attempt to create win-win-win. We are putting those out there and really soliciting comments first and foremost from the post-progressive community, right? Those who have an integral or post-progressive perspective. We're asking for them to weigh in on this.
Right on.
So once we get a little bit larger consensus and buy-in from post-progressives, then we'll take the platform and write op-eds about it and try to disseminate its thinking and get comment from the wider culture. So developing this evolving platform and making it be interactive, very important part of this website's mission. Another feature of the website that's worth just previewing here is what we're calling our invitation to all sides. So here we have those familiar 4 categories that we went over a little while ago. Progressive, what we're calling center left or moderate liberal, at least so people can identify what these are. Center right or libertarian and social conservative. And so, for example, when you click on progressive, it explains why these are some of the progressive values that we are attempting to forward. Right? These are values that we also value, even though they're normally identified primarily with progressivism. We've gone over some of these, right? Protecting the environment, championing social justice, et cetera. And we ask people to elaborate on their commitment to progressivism, what they see. And so that we ask people to add a comment or a testimonial here, and that is added to the bottom of the site. So folks who are partisans of these positions themselves can help define what it means, and they'll feel a sense of ownership there. Then we have this section of the website, which we're calling Engage and Participate. Here we have, we don't want this site to just be one way. It's not just informational, right, for people who view it. We want to engage as much two-way information, get people to input, get people to comment, get people to object, right, and otherwise practice this way of thinking for themselves. And so we have 3 internet-based exercises, or quizzes, internet quizzes as they've called. We've reviewed some of these in previous podcasts. The first one is new. We're calling it "Are You Post-Progressive?" And it's basically 12 statements, and you're asked to just agree or disagree. And then it gives you not only your overall percent of post-progressive out of 100, but it also gives you a transcendence score and an inclusion score. Like some people, they score very high on including the others, but they haven't quite transcended the worldview that they're in, which is, evolutionarily appropriate and fine. We're not condemning anyone, but we're just saying, look, the idea of post-progressive is to both transcend and include. And so some people transcend, they can't stand those other positions and feel politically homeless. So they're going to have a high transcendence score, whereas others are naturally more inclusive, even though transcendence may be more challenging for them. But when you combine this understanding of transcendence and inclusion, you can see how your perspective, at least how this test is. Now, let me say in all humility that we're not trying to do social science here. This is political rhetoric wrapped in the form of an internet entertainment. But nevertheless, it's fun to do, and we recommend it, obviously. The other exercise that we have here is the worldview questionnaire. developed by Anique DeWitt and adapted to an online version with the Institute for Cultural Revolution several years ago. We've had thousands of people take this test. And again, I don't think it's proper social science, but again, it's entertaining and it helps you understand worldviews and your own. And then we have this character development exercise, which I developed and put online. It's taken from the appendix of Developmental Politics, and the idea that it's an exercise in character development based on virtues. So it asks you to kind of explore what your highest virtues are and how those relate to your duties to other people, your duties to yourself, and your duty to something transcendent or greater than yourself. We also have here windows into our Twitter account, windows into our Facebook group that we're just starting and we invite people to be part of. So this page shows a lot of different ways that people can engage with our work, both on social media and here on the website. And then just moving down the menu here, we also are creating a kind of a club for post-progressivism. We're calling it the PostProgressive Alliance. It's grassroots, people who are attracted to this perspective and want to engage with it more. We're having monthly Zoom meetings, right? And so we have a wide variety of folks who are attracted to that. And we invite people who are interested in being part of the club to apply. Now, again, we're not trying to be exclusive, but we're trying to create an agreement space where post-progressive deliberation, so to speak, where there's a realm of trust, wherein we're in a worldview where we're at least trying to come from a post-progressive perspective and honoring different perspectives. And so within this agreement space, it really becomes a kind of a juicy we space, which we invite people to be part of. And the simple application process involves taking the post-progressive test, scoring 60% or more, and just affirming that you've taken the test. And you can take the test multiple times to get to the score, so it's hard. And then we ask you to give us a thoughtful answer, 200 words or less, to the following two questions. Why is a post-progressive approach to politics needed now? And two, how does post-progressivism differ from other political perspectives? So this just gives you a sense to think about it, to see whether this is something that you can participate in good faith. And then we also have member expectations like civility and confidentiality. And so if you can agree to those, maybe we ask you to tell us a little bit about yourself, but that's optional. But we do want to invite people and give them a sense, like it says in the masthead of the website, it's a home for the politically homeless. And that's what this Post-Progressive Alliance attempts to be. And so again, at the bottom of the website, we will include a link to the Institute for Cultural Evolution's website that explains how this is the Post-Progressive Project is a nonprofit initiative that's created by the Institute for Cultural Evolution, funded by the Institute for Cultural Evolution, and in a sense, the main work of the Institute right now. I think that the moment is right in history for staking out higher ground, for pointing to something that transcends and includes progressivism. And we really believe that we're not going to get it done with a website by itself, but this is a beginning. It's a first start. We want to spotlight other organizations. We want to include all kinds of different content. We want to keep growing the content and have it be refreshed on a regular basis so people can return and get up to date on what's going on. We hope to include with you, Jeff, a kind of a column that's frequent where you review the New York Times, the daily New York Times page. You wake up, read the New York Times, and tell us what you think from a post-progressive perspective. Yeah. And so I'll highlight that as a forthcoming important weekly video column, which we're really looking forward to hearing from you about.
Yeah, me too. Yeah, it's really great, Steve. I mean, I'm very impressed. There's really a lot that has flourished here in the last year, really. And it's now online, right? It's postprogressive.org.
Mm-hmm.
Post-progressive. -progressive.org.
Yeah, we're trying to keep the hyphen because it doesn't look good all smushed together. Yep. And if you Google post-progressive right now, the main entry is for a genre of music.
I know.
It goes beyond progressive music.
Right.
But in time, we hope that that our definition of post-progressivism as an emergent political perspective will occupy the number one spot and will come to really define this term in the public's mind.
Right on. Well, again, very impressive and congratulations. And I'm really excited to be part of the team pushing this forward. And I invite anybody who's listening to join us as well.
Indeed.
Right.
And so this video is being published at the same time that the website's being launched. We're trying to make a splash. We're trying to promote it as much as we can. A little bit like launching a book, right? We have a press release on our website, and we want to try to get media attention. Again, these days websites are not big news, but we do hope that this emerging political perspective that can do what other perspectives can't do very well, and that is include the best of all, that this is something that the media will eventually pay attention to.
Yeah.
And we're seeing people migrating to this understanding, modernists like George Packer.
Yeah.
And I know that his perspective is getting a lot of attention right now. And so hopefully people will come to see how we have an even deeper understanding of it, and one that points to, we think, a very pragmatic, but at the same time inspirational solution to our hyperpolarized democracy.
Well, that's so well said. Well, thank you. Thank you, Steve McIntosh. Thank you, everybody, for listening and or watching this edition of Post-Progressive Inquiries. And join us. All right.
Thanks, Jeff.
Okay. See you, folks.